By popular demand, we are covering the Halifax Explosion. And the Halifax Explosion, if you've never heard of it, in the context of explosions, is fucking mental. But it's nonetheless a disaster that people love attaching superlatives to. The largest non-nuclear explosion, the biggest man-made blast before the atomic bomb. And while these statements are kind of broadly true, in a lot of ways they're kind of the least interesting thing about this disaster. Now, generally this is a series that revolves around natural disasters. Is this a natural disaster? Absolutely not. But it's simply too interesting to ignore, so here we go. Now, this story, contrary to popular opinion, is not just about a ship exploding, although, yes, the broad story does kind of wrap itself around a ship that explodes, but this is kind of wrapped in chemistry and physics and navigation, and like a lot of these disasters, it was human behaviour. Now, before we go any further, it's important to talk about harbours, and I know this sounds somewhat boring, but we need to do it. It's important. It is kind of the foundation and baseline of what we need to know to understand why this happened, because not all harbours are created equal. Most coastlines are actually fairly crap if you're trying to park several ships there at once. You need shelter, you need deep water, you need protection from prevailing winds, and that's a pretty important one, and ideally somewhere that doesn't freeze solid every winter. And Halifax more or less had all of that. It's a great harbour, usually. But so that you can get your bearings, if you don't have a frame of reference as to where this harbour is, it's in Canada. It's situated on Canada's Atlantic coast, and Halifax Harbour is one of the largest natural harbours on the planet. So in geological terms, it's what's known as a drowned river valley, which sounds a little bit more exciting than it actually is. Essentially, it's a river that's carved out a valley, and then the last ice age ended, and sea levels rose, and the Atlantic simply flooded it. Therefore, we end up with a harbour, a pretty good one. Now, this is interesting in some ways, but perhaps not if you're more interested in a bloody great big explosion. So, during the First World War, this harbour became crazy valuable. And understand that at this point in history, this wasn't merely a Canadian harbour. It had become one of Britain's logistical lifelines. Tens of thousands of soldiers, millions of rounds of ammunition and fuel and food and medical supplies, everything that was ultimately destined for Europe passed through this harbour more or less. And understand that merchant ships rarely travelled alone, because German U-boats had become particularly good at sinking them, especially when these ships were travelling in isolation. So instead, ships assembled into convoys. So think of large groups of ships travelling collectively, because of course there's strength in numbers. So travelling this way drastically improved their chances of making it across the Atlantic Ocean instead of ending up under the Atlantic Ocean. But consequently, Halifax became really congested as a result of this. Ships would arrive and ships would depart, and others anchored awaiting their convoy. So everything more or less funneled through the relatively confined harbour. It's a big harbour, but there's loads of ships there. Why? Because there's a big war and they're all turning up collectively under military escort. Now, under normal circumstances, this isn't really a big deal because ships don't simply point themselves in a particular direction and just hope for the best. This isn't some kind of amorphous chaos. There are navigation rules, passing rules, whistle signals, established conventions, because there are maritime protocols. And none of this is an exact science, though. Anyone that works even in a modern harbour will tell you that there are occasionally collisions. However, most occur not because somebody doesn't know the rules or the protocols, but because two people simultaneously assume what the other is about to do, which is exactly where this episode gets interesting, because one of the vessels entering Halifax that morning was a French cargo ship called SS Mont Blanc. And before we talk about what she was carrying, let's clear up one of the biggest misconceptions surrounding explosives. I think Hollywood probably has a lot to answer for here, but they've essentially left people with the presumption that explosives are just crazy unstable substances, which is sometimes true, admittedly, but rarely. Reality is perhaps less theatrical generally. So if we take a common one that we've all heard of, take TNT for example, it is actually very stable. You can transport it, you can stack it, you can handle it, and even strike it, in fact, without a spontaneous detonation, which is precisely why militaries like to use this kind of stuff, largely because if your explosive explodes whilst you're transporting it, it is, by definition, not a particularly good explosive. So it's important to appreciate that the Mont Blanc wasn't necessarily dangerous because she was carrying TNT. She was dangerous because she was carrying a whole bunch of hazardous materials simultaneously, and each one had different fundamental properties. Around 2,300 tons of picric acid, approximately 200 tons of TNT, roughly 10 tons of gun cotton, and perhaps most importantly, over 30 tons of benzol stored in barrels across the upper deck. Now, to be very clear, benzol is not an explosive, it's just an extraordinarily flammable liquid. So its role here isn't so much detonating, its job is making everything else profoundly worse than it otherwise would have been. So, as opposed to imagining one enormous, gigantic bomb, I want you to imagine kind of a cacophony of hazardous chemicals that are coalescing into one massive disaster, each one behaving somewhat differently. But all of these are sharing rather unfortunate characteristics. They don't like fire, and unfortunately, fire was a big factor here. So the Mont Blanc was entering Halifax. Meanwhile, a Norwegian vessel called the SS Imo was leaving. Both ships approached one another inside a relatively narrow section of a large harbour. Now, I want you to try and recall what I said earlier about maritime navigation. There are rules, there are passing conventions, whistle signals, and these are designed specifically to stop two enormous ships, each weighing several thousand tons, from occupying the same patch of water, which is kind of exactly what nearly happened. Signals were exchanged, courses were altered, and then they were altered again, and each captain interpreted others' signals slightly differently. And neither was behaving irrationally per se, but each successive correction compounded the overarching confusion. In fact, when I was doing research for this episode, I found it quite interesting and actually quite endearing to find out that systems engineers apparently have a really lovely phrase for this. They call it a normal accident. Not because the accident itself is inherently normal, but because within sufficiently complicated systems, small misunderstandings can reasonably cascade into much larger consequences. So eventually, the bow of the Imo scraped across the side of the Mont Blanc. Now, this collision itself in isolation wasn't particularly severe in retrospect. Ships bumped into one another far more often than you'd probably expect. And had the Mont Blanc been carrying timber, this video probably wouldn't even exist. So the problem wasn't really the collision itself, it was what that collision damaged. And in this particular situation, that damage extended to several barrels of benzol which were ruptured on the surface or the deck of the ship, and that liquid spilled across the deck, and metal thus scraped against metal, which quite reasonably produced sparks, and those sparks ignited that benzol, which is now where we need to really clear up another misconception. Fire does not necessarily detonate explosives. This is another one that Hollywood probably gives us the wrong impression about. Instead, fire supplies heat, because, of course it does. And of course that heat supplies energy, and enough energy eventually changes the chemistry occurring inside explosive compounds. So think of it as gradually winding an impossibly powerful spring. The longer that fire burned, the more energy accumulated. Thus, the more unstable that cargo became. And that's precisely what happened aboard the Mont Blanc. The benzol continued burning, wooden decking became additional fuel, the steel hull trapped that energy and that heat. So of course the cargo holds became progressively hotter, and appreciate that nobody on board could realistically stop it by this point. So the crew abandoned ship almost immediately because of, common sense, but unfortunately nobody else really appreciated how dangerous this was on the periphery. So from the shoreline everyone just saw smoke and thought, cool. But tragically, at precisely 9 o'clock, 4 minutes and 35 seconds, almost 3,000 tons of high explosives detonated almost simultaneously. And appreciate that explosions are less about fire than most people tend to imagine. Fire is generally a byproduct of the aftermath. It's pressure that does the damage. The chemical energy stored inside those explosives was released in a fraction of a second, so solid explosive rapidly became intensely hot gas, and that gas wanted more space than physically existed within the ship, so it expanded violently and aggressively, meaning the surrounding air was compressed into an enormous pressure wave, and that wave accelerated away from the explosion faster than the speed of sound. And this is a fairly modern disaster in a relative sense, so there's lots of eyewitness accounts of this, and those eyewitnesses first described seeing an intense white flash, and only afterwards did they hear the explosion. Because light travels considerably faster than sound does, this pressure wave flattened buildings, and it shattered almost every single window in Halifax. In fact, one of the most common injuries associated with this disaster wasn't burns, interestingly enough, it was blindness. Thousands of people had quite reasonably instinctively walked towards their windows to go and watch the big fire in the harbour. So when that blast wave ultimately arrived, those windows exploded inwards into people's eyes, meaning that glass had ultimately become shrapnel, which is kind of a sobering reminder that secondary hazards often prove profoundly more dangerous than the event itself. Now, meanwhile, the explosion itself launched fragments of the Mont Blanc across the city. In fact, one section of the anchor, weighing over half a ton, travelled the better part of 4 kilometres before embedding itself into the ground, which I think we can all agree is absolutely mental. So this is until you appreciate quite how much energy had actually been released during this disaster. The blast displaced an enormous volume of harbour water as well, creating a localised tsunami of sorts. And this tsunami of sorts swept back across the shoreline. So for many survivors, the explosion wasn't really the final problem. It was merely the starting pistol on a generally pretty shitty day. And by the time this finally settled down, roughly 2,000 people had been killed and somewhere around 9,000 had been injured. But here's the thing. The Halifax explosion wasn't caused by one ship or one captain or one isolated mistake. It emerged because several independent systems, whether that be navigation, hazardous cargo, human behaviour, urban planning, chemistry, all interacted in precisely the wrong sequence. Remove almost any one of those variables and history probably changes. I'd like you to let me know in the comment section the kind of disasters, natural or otherwise, you'd like me to cover in the next episode. And it's also my proud duty to inform you that the Salt Shack Mineral app has now been released and is available for download.